Shubha, thank you very much for your time and for taking your time out, in fact, out of your busy schedule to join us today. What do you make of this lawsuit? Where will this all end, right? Because I remember when we look back at the financial crises that have just recently happened, there was always that argument about banks, right, being too big to fail. So is that sort of the logic when it comes to an organization like Google, or what do you think it's fine for that to be spoken of as something that should be broken up?
Yes, I mean, I think the too big to fail point was made in a different context where the economy was about to collapse. In this particular situation, I think the concern from the Justice Department is that it's just too big, period, that it's stifling competition, especially from startups and smaller companies. The philosophy behind the antitrust law is about competition. And so there is such a thing as just too big, period, under antitrust law. Whether we've reached that with Google is yet to be determined. Much of this, as you suggested, is repeating things that we worked through with Microsoft about 30 years ago when that investigation started in 1990, ending sort of with a whimper in the United States about 11 or 12 years later in 2002. So we'll see how this plays out. It's definitely a long game. The interesting issue is the timing. Right before the elections, there's some folks who view this as maybe an election move. We'll see how that plays out. But more interestingly, if there is a change in administration, how this lawsuit will proceed with the new administration, if there is one.
Right. So I'm glad you brought up the politics, right, of all this, because we are indeed close to the elections, and one would obviously connect us to that. What do you make of the political impact of all this? Because it's not like Google is a small player, right? I'm sure it lobbies heavily in Washington as well, as do these other big tech companies also. There are certainly then limits, aren't there, on what the U.S. government can actually do? Well,
okay, I'll try to unpack your question. Let me start with the last part of this. This was a 68-page complaint that ended, the complaint itself sort of ended somewhat weakly. There was a discussion of remedies, of